Walter Lee was very popular in town, Rotary president, large property owner, and when he passed, his son took it over. Funny enough, when Mr. Lee passed, and his son was actually a senior at Lehigh University, which is where my husband went, so we have a little Lehigh legacy going on in the news business. After the Lees, it went through a couple of hands and then was purchased by the Barr brothers. Little fun trivia there, the Bowers were also the brothers who purchased the John List house out of foreclosure up on Hillside Avenue after the murders up there, and were the owners actually when the house burned down. They then moved down to Kimball after that, and they had a couple of silent partners in the business. Jeff passed away, and then, Kurt passed away, and then Jeff took it over, and he was working there full-time along with his mother when his estranged ex-wife came up to the office at 50 Elm Street and shot him and herself in front of his mother and the entire office staff. That was in 1996. The only newspaper that did not cover the story, including national news, was the Westfield Leader. Mrs. Bauer prohibited the staff from publishing it. I have a lot of clippings. There was a couple of folks in town who had put together a lot of clippings about it, so I have that in a binder, as well as I also possess in my historical archives the original crime scene photos from the List murders, as well as a whole bunch of other really bizarre things, including the T-shirts that were sold on the street during the court case that say, "My name is Bob Clark." So we have a whole archive of neat Westfield trivia items. After the murder-suicide in the office, the paper was purchased by Horace Corbin, who was a retired engineer. And Horace took the papers literally out of bankruptcy. They were, at the time it was the Westfield Leader and the Scotch Plains Fanwood Times were the two papers that were under the Bowers ownership, and they were broke. He took them and he digitized them in a way that was not being done in 1996. And when I started with, and he launched the website for the newspaper the day before the New York Times launched theirs. So we have that little claim to fame because of Horace. And then when I started with the paper in 2000, I did start as a reporter covering the borough of Mountainside was my first beat. And we still divide the paper up amongst the reporters by town to this day, covering 7 towns of Scotch Plains, Fanwood, Westfield, Mountainside, Clark, Garwood, and Cranford. And we also cover the Board of Union County Commissioners. We are not the last weekly paper in Union County, but we are the last ones using the old, what I think is the true mode of communication, which is covering the local government meetings and getting our stories from there. Not only just covering the government meetings and keeping an eye on these governing bodies that spend a lot of money, in addition, especially the boards of education who spend the bulk of your tax dollars, but we get our stories from those meetings. So in all of the fun things that we do, we are paying attention to all of the public comments from folks like yourselves. And those things are often what pique our curiosity, because what makes a good reporter and a good editor is someone who always wants to learn and someone who is always curious and does not go into things deciding what facts are or what opinions are. You have to be willing to learn and be willing to change your mind about what you might be thinking based on where your work takes you. So I am And the paper is, under my leadership, an award-winning paper. We have won awards for journalism and photojournalism from the New Jersey Press Association, the New Jersey Society for Professional Journalists, and the National Newspaper Association. So we've taken home honorable mentions, first, second, and third place awards across all of those categories, including investigative journalism. So one of the things that we heard at a meeting, Westfield Board of Education meeting a couple years ago, was that a resident was saying that he had filed an OPRA request. Now, OPRA is New Jersey's version of the Freedom of Information Act, and the federal government calls it the Freedom of Information Act. New Jersey calls it the Open Public Records Act. You can request a lot of information, and even though the rules have changed, I haven't run into any roadblocks just yet. Nothing that I didn't run into before they changed the rules and tried to make it a little more difficult. But you can request anything from call logs to your elected officials and your government entities, emails, all kinds of things, in addition to your budgets and the regular run-of-the-mill. So you can get police reports, and you can have all kinds of things. And there are people out there that go out and request that information just to publish it on the internet. And all of that stuff lives a lot of places, which is why New Jersey was trying to tighten the rules, was to stop people from being able to purchase all of our information that's available in the public domain and resell it to companies for data mining, and so you can get more spam calls. I don't think it's working, but neither here nor there. So a resident had filed an OPRA request and said that it wasn't fulfilled properly, and that it had something in it that he didn't understand. And I thought to myself, well, that's awfully strange thing to say, and I'm going to request that information, because you can file a mirror request. So if you can get a log of all of the OPRA requests that have been filed and file a mirror request based on the number and say, I want whatever Jim got. Send me that paperwork. So we got about 30,000 pages worth of material in this OPRA request. And my lead reporter, Katie Moen, and I took a weekend and divided between the two of us, and went through about 10,000 pages of the Mandarin curriculum. But buried in there were some emails from an assistant superintendent in the Westfield School District who was using his position to push through curriculum which he was being paid by a private company to do. In addition to that, there were a lot of emails about Board of Education members trying to get their children moved through different classes, and there was a curriculum company that did an audit, not a curriculum, a board source company that did an audit of the board rules that they write, saying that their audit didn't meet with, their audit showed that their board rules didn't meet the state standard. And they did that to the tune of about $50,000. So they audited themselves for $50,000 to say that they had done a bad job and needed more money to write new rules. So that was, we took a first place award home from both the New Jersey Society for Professional Journalism and the State Press Association for investigative journalism, because we published it all. And miraculously, some people retired right after that story. So that's what we do. And that is what the importance of local journalism is that if we're not sitting around in these meetings and paying attention to the things going on and reading the agendas, you all have, the public has busy lives, and if nobody's watching them, it will breed corruption. I think that most people that get into local politics and run for office do so with the highest ideals, and I have met really some of the finest people who give of their time, because Westfield is a bit of a unicorn in that none of them get paid. So none of your school board members get paid across the state, which I think is the most thankless job. The second most thankless job is being a mayor or a council person, especially in this day and age when you are accessible to your constituents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they all publish their cell phone numbers. So their constituents can call them all the time, and they do. It's a very thankless job, but there are, you know, some bad apples that get into it for the wrong reasons every once in a while, and you also have, you know, employees of the government who, you know, don't always do the right thing, and somebody has to be keeping an eye on them. So we've been very successful by continuing to focus on the news product. I bought the newspapers on March 6th of 2020 when Horace decided to retire. Of course, the world shut down on March 13th of 2020. So I had a whole 7 days before the world turned on a dime. And that was a really fascinating and interesting time that, in addition to all of the changes that I have gotten to watch through my career in technology, we had to move on a dime and pivot again to a world that was shut down. And we were one of the few businesses that was not required to shut down. And I actually had to have some legal maneuvering. Thankfully, I'm married to my attorney, so you know, he's easily accessible to me. Because I was denied entry to things by government entities, and I had to show them the governor's order and get an attorney involved to say, you cannot prohibit the press. We're subject only to the Constitution. And we have absolute freedom, and even, you know, and we ran a lot of commentary on Governor Murphy's orders, which we were not big fans of, but even he recognized the ability and unlimited ability of the press to be able to move around and do their jobs during the shutdown. So we were alone in downtown Westfield, which was the best parking I've ever had. And we continued to put out a paper every single week through the entire pandemic. We lost the bulk of our advertisers. Was about 80% of our advertisers disappeared overnight. And we went to the minimum page count of 12. The bulk of our advertising revenue is through events. Westfield, we're really blessed in Union County. If you don't know it, Westfield Community Players, Cranford Dramatic Club, the New Jersey Festival Orchestra are all based in Union County. We do a lot of advertising for them. Our local libraries are great supporters of ours in terms of advertising for their events. There were no events to advertise. So all of that disappeared, and a lot of other businesses that were shut, you know, they didn't have the funds to be able to do it. So through some fancy footwork, we pivoted to a free online publication, and I sunk some money in. I figured if everybody was home, let me do a couple of townwide mailings. And so I did that in our various towns and was able to pick up subscribers. So while daily subscriptions dropped, our subscriptions actually rose during the pandemic because I took advantage of a captive audience. And we did a lot of free things for a lot of the local businesses, those that were doing special delivery services. We had a listing of them during that so that people knew where they could get things. We were constantly monitoring when the vaccines came out, where they were available, and how to get on those waiting lists. If you'll recall, it was quite a bit of shuffling around when they first came out of where you could get them from the general public. So we did a lot of that as public service work, because I really believe that the success of a local weekly newspaper is being a part of the community. while it's our job to report on government and keep an eye on them, we are a member of the community, and we provide a service to nonprofits and groups like yourselves where we run the press releases at no charge. Because you guys don't have any money, otherwise you'd have singing lessons. Sorry, couldn't help myself. So in addition to owning the paper, I'm the president of the Westfield Rotary Club. I am the first vice president of the JCC of Central New Jersey, and in my free time, I parent 4 children. Who you might see running around with press passes, taking photos at various events, because I have put them to work young. I have a couple of teenage girls, and then a young boy who fancies himself as a soccer star at the moment, but that's subject to change. So I got started in the business while I was in college. I grew up in Westfield. My parents really wanted me to get into the sciences and be a pharmacist, as my father had been, and I wasn't really very good at it. And I didn't like it all that much, and I really fancied myself as a writer. And a job came up in the paper as a beat reporter for Mountainside, and I thought, well, I could do that. So I applied, and Horace was kind enough to give me the job, and in pretty short order, I was putting myself through school at Union County College at the time, and in pretty short order, I was promoted to covering Westfield, and then moved through. I went on to write for a very short-lived real estate section at the New York Post, and then freelanced for a lot of other publications. But I fell in love with local government, and I know that's like a really weird thing to enjoy. And I recognize the nerdiness in myself. There's nothing I love more than a budget. And we are getting into budget season right now. All the municipal budget and the school board budgets are coming out, and I love to read all of the lines and see where they're spending all of our tax dollars. There's nothing like a good agenda setting session, because that's where they really get into the nitty gritty. So if you think, when you see public meetings and you see there's an agenda setting session or a conference session versus a public session, you want to go to the conference session. They still have public speaking time there. You still get your 3 minutes, even though it's not televised. That's where you'll hear what's really going on, because that's where they all sit and talk to each other. And it's regardless of party. That's where you get to see the meat and potatoes of how they really work together and compromise, and the discussions that go on about what they're changing. And they're changing things all the time. They're changing your local laws, your regulations, what you have to file a permit for, because that's how they make their money, right? Because your municipalities especially, they only get the smallest percentage of your tax dollar. Almost every town in Union County is paying more percentage-wise to the county of Union, and definitely your school budget makes up the bulk of your tax bill. Your municipality gets the smallest amount and provides you the least amount of services. Other than paving your roads and plowing your roads and picking up your leaves, hardly any of them are supplying anything beyond that in terms of like actual services. Almost no municipalities provide garbage anymore, except for your Linden, Elizabeth, Hillside. I think Garwood is the furthest western municipality that still does garbage pickup. Union does also. Union, thank you. So, it's a handful. And now most of you also pay an additional sewer tax, because sewer pipes are based on gravity. So your sewer service is based on wherever your lowest point is near your municipality. Our section of Union County, the 7 towns that we cover, are serviced by either Rahway Valley Sewage Authority or the Plainfield Sewage Authority, depending on which way the pipes flow, because those pipes are not run by force, they're run solely by gravity. And that infrastructure, given the age of Union County, is so old, it has required a tremendous amount of upgrades by both Plainfield and Rahway Valley Sewage Authority. And they've passed that cost on to their participating municipalities, and the municipalities cannot keep those costs in their budget and remain in the state mandated 2% cap, right? So none of your municipalities or school boards are allowed to go above a 2% increase, which was Trenton's way many years ago of trying to keep property taxes in line. Your school boards can then put everything to a ballot vote. Your municipalities cannot do that. They must stay in that 2% cap no matter what. And so that includes health insurance, pension payments, all of their collective bargaining agreements. So the municipalities themselves are in a bind where they can't come up with more money except in permits. So now you will start to see, if you haven't already in your municipalities, permits for parking, including on-street parking. If you're a commuter town in the vicinity of the train station, you'll have to have a resident permit. You'll have permits for everything that you want to do to your home, whether it's a water heater, any kind of plumbing, electricity, HVAC. You'll need a permit to do basic work. And they are looking to permit just about everything that they can get their hands on, because it's really the only way that they can make money. Now, they all did very well during the pandemic in terms of those permits, because people were doing major construction projects on their homes in order to build office space to work from home. So they all did pretty well during that. But now that the tides have turned, and what they lost in that was their municipal court revenue, because no cops were writing tickets. So things are starting to balance out a little bit on that end, but they're still looking to figure out new ways to drive revenue into their municipalities, because the municipality is, at the end of the day, a business, and they get, as I said, very little from your tax dollars. Obviously, the school boards get the bulk of it, and that is always a good thing for property values, to have a good school system, can say a lot about school systems, but the County of Union is sort of that middle of the road part of your tax bill. And your county commissioners run a lot of the social service programs, but you've also got services in terms of they have their own police force. They then have the sheriff's unit. They have the bomb squad. They have, they have a SWAT team, but the SWAT team is actually made up of officers from every single department in Union County. So each department, it's fun to work across our offices across the street from their facility. So we know when the guys are coming in, because all of a sudden there'll be a multitude of vehicles speeding in, and then they pick up the armored unit and head out. And then we always want to know where they're going. So that's a lot of what they do, and they now have a full-time ambulance service. Many of our volunteer rescue squads are hurting terribly for members. Most used to be that a lot of the squads had a lot of people that, local business owners that worked in town would volunteer and be available during the day. They don't have a lot of daytime coverage. Most of them, they used to be able to staff one or two, 2 and 3 crews a day, and they cannot. And there's an increase in call volume that has necessitated the county to run its own ambulance service. That's run 24/7, 365 out of the North Avenue facility, and now they are putting a secondary facility in the eastern portion of Union County. They bought some land over in Roselle. So the County of Union that's a big chunk of change. And while their operating budget is subject to the same 2% cap that the municipalities and the school boards are, what the counties do a lot of is bonding. They bond and borrow money for enormous construction projects for their parks and other various facilities. You're about to hear about and get a brand new ice rink over at Warren Park. And that will be paid for through bonds and your tax dollars. They're building a facility right next to the existing one so that they will have two to host all of our ice hockey teams throughout the county, because there's not enough ice playing fields at this point, or rinks, right? So that is the bulk of what we do. Should I take questions?
Okay, we'll go to Bill Tittle online to lead it off. Go ahead, Bill, unmute and ask.
Lauren, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I've been a Westfield Leader reader my whole life. Have you ever heard of I do have a question, serious question, but have you ever heard of About Town with Sally?
We love About Town with Sally.
All right, well, bring it back.
About Town with Sally was a gossip column in the Leader at one time, and we have often joked about bringing it back because it was really the down and dirty gossip of who was dating who was bothering who. And it's really fun when you go through the archives. One of the fun things is the amount of information that people used to publish about themselves, mostly to show off to their neighbors. You know, oh, Bob and Judy will be in the south of France for the summer, and their house will be vacant for you to rob.
Hi, I've been watching the website that someone has that attends the county commissioner meetings. And I'm curious to know, do you have someone there in person or, and one more thing, the thing that I get is just a clip of a piece of the meeting where someone asked a question and then they film it. But are those meetings on Zoom entirely for the public to see, the county meetings?
Great question. So yes, we have reporters in the room. Only on rare occasions do I allow them to, you know, if somebody's sick or injured or whatever, will I allow them to watch the meetings online and report about it? I ask them all to be in the room, and I have a team of about 8 reporters at the moment, including 1 full-time. It's much more important to be in the room, because if you don't understand something, your town clerk, your administrator, your mayor that are right there, and you can grab them for questions, works much better. And I also just like them to know we're keeping an eye on them, because sometimes we're the only ones in the room. That's at the county commissioner meetings. They are taped, and they post them on their website. It's hard to find. It's buried in the agenda section. And they usually post them 3 to 4 days later, the full video. They do not live stream them.
Thank you for an extremely interesting talk. I was especially struck by when you said that reporters are subject only to the Constitution. I like that. I'm going to remember that. I have a very small question. I read the Scotch Plains Hawk, and so there's local news, something happened somewhere, or there's a new building project or approval, something like that. But when I read these stories, they never have the exact address. And could you explain the reason behind that?
On the development projects?
Yeah, or when there's, a lot of times when there's a fire or when there's some event that happens somewhere, you don't give the address, you just give the general location. Is there a specific reason why that is?
No. So sometimes the development and the planning board hearings will be about blocks of, and sometimes they don't actually have an address. In some of them, we get a lot and a block number, and it's actually an address range. So I will often put where something is and where it is in relation to something. So like we had one in Garwood last week where they're going to tear down a whole block of buildings. So, and it's on South Avenue. So I said it currently houses a company called Action Limousine, and it is near the Westfield border. was the best landmark, because otherwise I'm saying, well, it's across the street from the warehouses, and it really doesn't have an address because it's a whole block. But I think that's basically what it is. That's typically the answer. And sometimes we don't know. Like if there is a fire and we are racing up to press, we don't necessarily have a house number. There was one on Victor Street. I have no idea the house number. I had a picture of the house on fire and afterwards, but I couldn't have told you the house number because I couldn't read it off the house anymore.
Thanks, Lauren. You're a real superwoman.
Some say that.
So is there a Pulitzer Prize in the horizon for you guys?
That would be terrific.
I know, you sound like you deserve it.
Thank you.
So my question has to do with freedom of speech and freedom of press, but those things come under push and pull, especially with the events in Washington, D.C. in recent months. So I read an article about a Supreme Court decision. I only know the basics. I bet you know all of the background story, that loosens the prohibitions against individuals suing publications for libel or whatever. So what happens is well-to-do individuals hire consulting companies and they get platoons of lawyers to sue publications about things that they don't want published. So first, do you know about it? Can you explain the background? And then have you ever been subject to that?
Well, I've been threatened. I get threatened a lot with lawsuits for libel and slander, and most people don't understand the law. And the law has actually not changed. So there was a Supreme Court case brought by Sarah Palin against the New York Times, and she was denied. So the old standard remains. Case law has not changed on it. Sullivan, I think it was Sullivan versus New York Times is a standing case law. Don't quote me on that, I might be wrong. But basically the answer is that if the newspaper publishes something that is incorrect and damages the individual, whether personally or in their business, then they have to prove damages. They still cannot be held responsible for it if they did it by accident and in good faith. So basically, I could, if someone comes into my office and says to me that they saw the mayor beating a puppy on the corner, I could publish it and say, Bob came into my office and told me and said that he saw the mayor beating a puppy on the corner. Now, let's say that then we have, all these cameras all over the place, and it turns out that the mayor was not beating the puppy, the mayor was actually rescuing the puppy from the sewer grate. I would then print a correction and say that we were wrong. Again, corrections, page 4. The difference is the intent. If I decide to make up a story, or if I know full well that Bob is crazy and a liar, and I know that the mayor wasn't beating the puppy, but I run that story and then refuse to print a correction, then that is where I could get into trouble as the press, because then I'm doing it intentionally. And that Sarah Palin case was really a fascinating look at the intentionality, because when they went through litigation and went through the discovery process and got all of the internal emails of the New York Times editorial board, there was some language in there amongst the editors that made it sound like they really knew that they did not have the facts right and that they wanted to run with the editorial anyway. And they did not care about what was going to come. And so you have to be, this is where caring about the end result in the journalism business really matters, because much like medicine, you want to do no harm, right? You're not going into it to fry somebody. That's not good journalism. It can't be your end goal. You can't just decide that you don't like somebody and you want to go after them. That's not journalism. That's Facebook. Journalism is letting the facts bear themselves out and checking, making sure that you're right before you go to print. And if you don't know the information, you don't make something up and you don't just print guesses. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I saw the headline and didn't pursue it until I saw you talking today, and it made me wish I'd looked further, but maybe you can tell me more about it. I saw that the current mayor of Westfield and several of her running mates decided not to run again. And I wondered, what's the story behind the scenes on that? Why is that happening?
Sure. So Westfield is its own animal. It's a 4-year term. And that group of folks, 3 council members and the mayor have served 2 4-year terms, which is what they always said that they were going to serve. Mayor Brindle always was upfront that she was going to serve 2 terms and would not seek a third, so this came as no surprise to me. It is a grueling job to be a council person and the mayor in Westfield, and she has really done it full time. And I imagine that she is very tired because much like me, they got into it before the pandemic and also had to get through the pandemic as elected officials. And this has been quite an 8 years to have served in office. The new candidates were announced yesterday. The filing deadline to run for office was 4 o'clock. I won't publish the names until I've checked the actual, until they're certified by the clerk. People can make all kinds of announcements, as we saw. We all just watched Ed Durr campaign for office for the past several months for the governor primary and then didn't file yesterday. So I wait until the county clerk certifies those until I'll publish a list of names. But I've seen them, and it's a nice new slate of candidates. I wish them all a lot of luck on both sides of the aisle, and the Republicans have announced their slate with a sitting councilman, Mike Domagala, will run for mayor, and the Democrats will all be newcomers. That's not unusual after that many years of service to the council. What is unusual is that they're all leaving together. And as you know, there's only 3 of them that were left from the original role because Dawn Mackey resigned her seat and when she moved out of Westfield a year or so ago, and former councilman Jim Healy is currently occupying the seat, a retired Superior Court judge and former councilman. And he's not going to seek the office either. But you guys should get him up to speak. He's a great speaker and would make a good member of the old guard. See, look at that, I'm recruiting for you too.
I'm going to ask a question myself. You gave us an interesting example of how you've wound up with 30,000 pages and found some very interesting things. But my question is, what strikes you as the story that was the most difficult to get? Whether it was a lot of research was needed or a lot of digging or there were issues. What stands out to you?
So I have there's actually 2 stories that stand out to me. One is one that I waited a long time for. So there was always rumors for many, many years about a teacher at Westfield High School fooling around with some girls. And they were always, it was rumors. And a woman came to me many years after her graduation and said to me that she had had an incident with him. And had I ever heard anything else? And I said, I've heard the same rumors that everybody else in town has heard. And I said, I won't run a single source story. There has to be more than one, and there has to be some verification and other things. And it was about 4 years later that multiple women came forward, and they came to me. Why? I really couldn't answer that question, but they all came to me. And there were emails and text messages and other things that backed up their claims. And Horace was the publisher at the time. I was the lead reporter and an editor. And so that was, you know, an interesting road of something that I basically waited 4 years to come forward and to fruition and to have the backup that was needed to run the story. And the teacher had gone on to teach in another state and doesn't teach there anymore after publication of the story, and which turned into a series because it turned out that there were a whole bunch of lawsuits that had taken place in the background many years before, which had gone undiscovered and were sort of sealed and back in when and then had been unsealed. It was an interesting time. And the other thing that was very interesting that I covered was, I don't know if you're all familiar with it, it was in a Netflix miniseries, The Watcher, the Westfield Watcher case, which was a story about threatening letters that went to a particular house and the family in that house in Westfield. That was my story. The neighbors had come to us and said something weird was going on in the house, and we started looking into it. And I can't say how, but I got a hold of the letters through verified sources, and I did a title search like a real estate attorney would do in your real estate transaction. I contracted with a title company, did a title search, and spoke to a member of every single family that lived in that house previously, and that house is rather old, but still managed to track down just about everybody, and nobody said anything weird was going on, and we published that story, including the fact that it was female DNA on the envelopes, which I was able to source, and that story was picked up internationally. So that is my most far-reaching story. But in subsequent reporting, I have been reduced to local reporter. So anytime you see a story about the Watcher when it was broken by local reporter, that's me.
I came up here to ask a question about the Star Ledger. But before I do that, I just wanted to comment on the New York Times versus Sullivan case. You're absolutely right about that case. The gist of that case was that if it involves a public figure, you have to prove actual malice. That's a very high standard. Against you or I, it could be just, you know. So that's the difference there. Now, my question about the Star Ledger. I have subscribed to the Ledger for many, many years. I live in Summit. The Independent is gone. The Herald is gone. So there's really no newspaper for me to read anymore since February 2nd. Yes, I subscribe to the Ledger online, but it's not like reading it in the morning when you have your breakfast. And the last 30 or so pages out of 60 or 70 are ads. Is there any newspaper, print, that would have state news? What's going on in Trenton? What new laws are being enacted or proposed? Where can you get that if you don't live in Westfield?
That's a great question. So the Herald, the Record are all owned by Gannett. The Ledger is owned by Advance Publications, which is a privately held company by the Newhouse family, who also own a lot of other things like People Magazine. The last remaining print papers, dailies, covering New Jersey are the Courier and the Home News, and you only need one of them, and here I'll criticize my competitors a bit. Gannett answers to a board of directors, and I print with Gannett. Gannett prints my paper every week, so I'm brethren and that I pay them money to print my paper. And they run a great print shop. USA Today is printed right here in New Jersey. Their papers are cookie cutters, so you only need one of them. They have different mastheads, but they look pretty identical at Gannett, and they answer to their shareholders and a board of directors. And they don't put the love and the care into reporting that we once did in daily news. And I think the same could be said of the Ledger. They put different priorities into their editorial pages and opinion writing than they did into reporting. And if you were a subscriber to the Ledger before February 2nd, when they stopped printing, you knew that you were no longer getting a Union County section. You were lucky if you got the Union County home sales in the Union County section, and it was mostly made up of whatever they glommed together from wherever their lone print reporter was working that week. Whereas it used to be back in the day, they had a Union County bureau and a Middlesex County bureau, and they had a reporter on the ground in each of their counties, which I still do in each of my 7 towns. And I think that when they put their profitability and the idea of the changing times of opinion writing ahead of actual news reporting, and that's where they put their money into, that's where they went sadly awry. But the Courier or the Home News are the last 2 remaining daily newspapers in this part of New Jersey that still have a state house reporter. But it's the same reporter working for both papers because they're owned by Gannett, so you only need one of those, but you could still get those as daily papers. In South Jersey, the Asbury Park Press is still printing, as is the Atlantic City Press, but the Atlantic City Press is no longer a 7-day-a-week daily. I think they're only 5 days now, because they're now delivering through the US Postal Service, because that's, like, the newspaper industry doesn't really need any help dying, but the state of New Jersey said that you can't employ your delivery drivers anymore as 1099 part-time employees, even though they only work a couple of hours a day and don't have an office. And they were running around auditing all the newspapers and finding them payroll and other things because apparently these people should have been classified as employees. So rather than deal with delivery people, the Atlantic City Press has switched to delivery through the US Postal Service, which is how we deliver the paper as well.
Thanks, Lauren. Before we thank you, and which will take a second. Oh, sure, online? No, me. Oh, okay, okay. I have to say, I learned so many things about the paper and the town. I'm astonished, but I have one short question. I didn't notice until you wrote about it in the paper that the Leader doesn't endorse local candidates. And I said, oh yeah, that's right, they don't endorse candidates. Can you discuss that decision, and which I'm still up in the air about?
So unlike our friends at the Washington Post, I made a decision the day that I bought the paper that I was not going to endorse candidates. The paper was actually started, if you look in the original masthead, as a Republican newspaper. And for many years, off and on with publishers, there were those that wanted to endorse candidates and did, and those that chose not to. I decided from the very beginning that it was not something that I was going to do. Number one, I think that our particular area and a lot of places, people are smart enough to make their own decisions. And you get enough of people telling you what to think and what to do across media channels in this country, just enough. I'm tired of everybody telling me what to think and what to do. I lay out the facts for everybody. I tell people what, people's campaign platforms are, what they would like to do, what they're promising to do, and let people draw their own conclusions. That's number one. Number two, at the end of the day, whoever gets elected, I have to work with them. And we're covering a small area. I mean, Westfield is the largest municipality that we cover at 30,000 people. Garwood is 12 square blocks. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me, certainly personally, and also professionally, who gets elected, because they're going to do the best job that they think they're going to do, whatever their agenda is. And we have to report on it, and we have to work with them and have a flow of information. So it doesn't really work well in terms of getting what we need in terms of information and communicating it to the public. So I don't think it's really my place, my purview, and what my personal likes and dislikes about any candidate. And, you know, what if I don't think that Mary makes the best cupcakes? You know, what difference does that make to whether she can serve as an elected official or not? Watch those wires.
I have a simple question from actually Bill Tittle. What's your take on One Westfield Place?
Oh, One Westfield Place. One Westfield Place will be the development that goes in the place of Lord and Taylor, along with the South and North Avenue train station lots that the town owns, and the corner of Central and North Avenue, and both sides of the road where Lord and Taylor is, both the employee parking lot. And they've scaled it down a bit, which is good. I will, at this point, continue to reserve judgment as we watch the economy and the market change from when it was proposed over 2 years ago. At the moment, there is no financial agreement between the One Westfield Place, Lord and Taylor Streetworks entity and the town of Westfield. In the revised plan, there has not been a signed financial agreement, and until there is one, there is no project. Nothing is going in, no shovel is going in the ground until a financial agreement has been signed. It is not clear to me what the holdup is on that, whether it's on one side or the other, but I'm gonna bet that Westfield's negotiating team is trying to get the most money that they can out of the developer, and there is some sort of a stalemate there at the moment, which is not unusual. We saw the same thing in Cranford between the municipality and Harts Mountain. At least Westfield is trying to negotiate it up front without getting involved in litigation that cost Cranford and Harts Mountain a small fortune through years and years of litigation. So it remains to be seen. I am tired of looking at the empty Lord and Taylor building at this point, personally. I drive by it almost every day. You know, I wish that something would begin, because I think that some development there would be a positive thing for the town in terms of ratables and other things, because right now the town, you know, can't collect the full breadth of the tax dollars, let alone pilot payments that were in the offing. So, you know, it's very limited funds, and, you know, something needs to move forward there. What that looks like at the end of the day, well, I guess we'll see what bears out in the election, because if there's no financial agreement done by January 1, you may have a very different looking negotiating team on the Westfield side of that, and one can only imagine what that will bring to the table. So to be determined.
So like so many parts of our meeting, there's a ritual to this. And we thank our speakers in 3 ways. I got one of these, so you get one of these. And on that, you'll see the orchid, which I like to point out in case you don't remember this, that Madison is the Rose City, or used to be called, in Summit, where we used to meet, is the Orchid City. It's tremendously interesting to me because they were selling to wealthy people in New York and filling. And the other thing is an orchid.
Thank you.
To go with that, and I'm sure that that'll fit in your office very appropriately at the front desk. And the last thing is our old guard salute.
Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me, Steve. I appreciate it.